Good morning, everyone. Greetings, morning or afternoon, wherever you may be. It's great that you're able to join us and participate into the ALBA Network Diversity Week, which started October 23rd and will conclude on October 27th. Today marks the third webinar on that series. Next slide, please. It's titled Unfinished Business: Persistent Global Gender Disparities in Neuroscience. This webinar is sponsored by the ALBA Network and IBRO. Next slide. I want to share a few words about the ALBA Network. Hopefully you're familiar with this network. This is an international network of brain scientists that are committed to foster diversity, equity, and inclusion in science and academia. It really has grown tremendously and now boasts about 1,500 plus members in 88 countries. Next slide. Some example of the ALBA Network activities include awareness and advocacy, providing data and resources on the status of what's going on in the neuroscience community, bringing visibility and recognition to neuroscientists across the globe, and also networking and mentoring activity. Next slide. If you have not done so, I encourage you to sign the ALBA Declaration that was launched in 2021. And actually, it provides an action-driven program for the activities of ALBA. It has been signed by 223 organizations and 697 individuals from 52 countries. So again, please, I encourage you to sign the declaration. Next slide, please. The ALBA Network really has an action-driven approach in addressing inequities in neuroscience. So there's a number of activities and issues that are being dealt with, including, and just a few examples, AI and racism, imposter syndrome, how, the impact of gender disparity in science. So this is an organization that if you're not familiar with, I encourage you to go to their website. Next slide. It is supported by a number of organizations. One of them is the International Brain Research Organization, which I'll mention a few words in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Also, a number of partnering organizations have joined ALBA in their quest to promote diversity and inclusion in the science community. Next slide. This is a few words about IBRO. Again, this is the International Brain Research Organization that brings really neuroscience at the global level. And this is an organization, two more clicks. Their focus really is on career development as well as promoting neuroscience in general. And I encourage you to utilize their journal for publication, the Journal of Neuroscience and IBRO reports. I'm going to now turn over the podium to my co-chair, who is going to talk about who's going to introduce the topic of the webinar today. We'll go back later on to the panel. But right now, I am really pleased to have my co-chair, Virginia Valiant, join us. Virginia is the author of Why So Slow? The Advancement of Women. And also she co-authored with Abigail Stewart another book titled An Inclusive Academy, Achieving Diversity and Excellence. We look forward to hearing your comments, Virginia. Thank you. You have about 10 minutes.
Thank you, Emmeline, and it's such a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to talk about universal aspects of women's continued unnecessarily slow progress in the sciences and in professional life in general. You'll be hearing from our panelists about a number of specific issues, but what I'm going to concentrate on are universal aspects. The main place where there are issues is evaluation. Evaluation is a ubiquitous feature of our lives. It involves our work products, our selves. Evaluation is consequential and cumulative. That is, it affects our jobs, invitations to speak, recognition, how much influence we have, salary, teaching responsibilities. All of those are affected by the evaluations that we make of other people and that other people make of us. These evaluations are subject to error. I'm going to discuss just 3 among many universal sources of error in evaluations. The first is belief in one's own objectivity. The second is confidence in the sufficiency of one's own good intentions. And the third is schemas. Let me very briefly review some of these. Almost everybody, especially people in science, prides themselves on their objectivity. In an interesting experiment, people were encouraged to rev up their beliefs in their objectivity. And the experimenters found that people were more likely to make a biased judgment if they had just congratulated themselves for being objective. Most of us in academia think we are objective. So it's very hard for us to see that we're making errors when we evaluate other people. The second feature that I want to talk about is confidence in the sufficiency of one's good intentions. Most of us are very aware of the fact that we have good intentions. That makes it very hard for us to see where we are making mistakes. Sorry. So there are several experiments all along a similar line showing that when people's good intentions are brought to their attention, they're more likely to make a biased judgment. This is called moral licensing. So when we wonder why people don't see that they're doing the wrong thing, these 2 errors of reasoning, which as I indicated are just 2 of many, are some of the reasons. The third reason has to do with gender schemas. Schemas are cognitive structures that we have that we use to order our experience. We use schemas for absolutely everything, for physical objects, for social categories, everything. A schema is similar to a stereotype, but I prefer the term schema because it's a more neutral term than stereotype is. Gender schemas are hypotheses about what it means to be male and what it means to be female. Sometimes they're conscious, sometimes they're not conscious. We see men as capable of independent action, that is, they're agentic. They do things for a reason, they're instrumental, and they focus on the business at hand. They're task-oriented. We see women as nurturant, communal, and expressing their feelings. Of course, one can be all of these things, but we tend to see, both men and women alike, tend to see men as having the 3 characteristics I've listed, and women as having the 3 characteristics I've listed. Now, if we think about what's involved in being a neuroscientist or any kind of scientist, does it seem to go better with the characteristics that we associate with men or the characteristics that we associate with women? Seems to be the mesh is better with the characteristics we associate with men. So these schemas affect judgments of professional competence. So when you give scientists identical dossiers, except for the gender of the name at the top, women are judged as less competent than men by scientists. These are chemists, physicists, and biologists, and equally so by men and women. That is, women are as likely to underestimate women in professional settings as men are. Primarily, this is true for people who believe gender equity is no longer a problem. So that belief in the progress that we've made, and there has been progress, is exaggerated by some people so that they think, well, now there isn't a problem anymore. And those are the people who are most likely to make these errors of judgment. Many of the everyday disparities that people experience can seem trivial. Here's one, the meeting. I have a red arrow pointing to Marie, let's call her, who's made a suggestion that everybody has ignored. And then George, let's call him, has made the same suggestion. And you can see everybody around the table is smiling at George, except for Marie, who's wondering what's wrong with what she said. If she says something about it, people may say, you're making a mountain out of a molehill, or don't sweat the small stuff. It's too trivial, don't worry about it. And that's where the notion of the accumulation of advantage comes in. Success comes from building many small gains into bigger gains. So if you don't get your share of small gains, you won't be able to accumulate them and get bigger gains. Advantage accumulates, and so does disadvantage. So each time you aren't listened to, it chips away at how credible you seem, and you lose a little each time. So mountains are molehills piled one on top of the other. All right, what are our takeaways so far? There are three things to understand. First is the errors of reasoning that everybody is likely to make. Second, how schemas work. And third, the importance of even small inequities. Given those as a background, what can you or we do? Well, one thing we can do is organize and work with other people for change. Another thing to do is to be inclusive. And this may seem like a small thing, but people's feeling of belonging and inclusion has implications for how much they are likely to stay in the workplace and how productive they are likely to be. And we have some say over what happens there. So the takeaways here are act by organizing for change and act by being inclusive. Emmeline already mentioned Abigail Stewart's in my book. It has a lot of material on what I've just talked to you about, as well as other material. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Virginia. Mathilde, can you go back to the panel, please? The slide of the panel. So now I'm really pleased to introduce an outstanding group of researchers and neuroscientists from across the globe. So we have Dr. Sadaf Ahmed from the University of Karachi in Pakistan. Sadaf is also the president of PASBAN, the Pakistan Society of Basic and Applied Neuroscience. We have Dr. Ashley Borg from the Max Planck Institute. We have Dr. Angelina Kakusa from Makerere University College of Health Science in Uganda, and Dr. Fran Bubani from the National Research Council of Argentina. So we have representation from across the globe. When we envisage this panel, we talk to our panelists and ask them in their comments, in their presentation, to talk about different their perspective on various facets where the gender gap is evident in the region that they're representing. So we will hear comments about hiring and retention, about career progression and transition point, about position of leadership, and also the environment where they actually function. So social, cultural, and religious impact on the gender gap. So each of the panelists have about 5 to 6 minutes, and then we'll have a panel where we'll pose some questions to those panelists, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So without further ado, Dr. Ahmed, you have the floor.
I think maybe we can
Can you
go
share
with,
your slides?
I think maybe we can go with Ashley, because
Sure.
I think Sadat has
is
a,
having some. Okay, so
Yes.
sorry for the change in order, but we're gonna go with Dr. Ashley Borg, and we'll come back to Dr. Ahmed in a minute. Ashley?
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Ashley Burke. I'm a postdoc in Aaron Schumann's lab at the Max Planck Institute for Brain Research in Frankfurt, Germany, and I'm also a gender equality officer at the Institute. And so I, along with my postdoc mentor, Dr. Aaron Schumann, and a PhD student in the lab, Teresa Spano, co-wrote an article published a few days ago in Nature Neuroscience titled "A European Perspective on Structural Barriers to Women's Career Progression in Neuroscience." And before giving you a preview, I want to mention that we do not explicitly delineate in the article which barriers are more or less relevant to cisgender versus transgender women. And I want to acknowledge here that the roots of misogyny run deep. So aspects of gender bias are often directed toward feminine presenting individuals, regardless of whether they were assigned female at birth. I also want to emphasize that the nature of discrimination faced by transgender women, as well as women who are disabled, an ethnic minority, and so on, is shaped by their intersecting social identities and can therefore look quite different and be more severe than the discrimination faced by cisgender, non-disabled white women, for example. So with that said, I'd like to first introduce the foundational question of what is the proportion of women among European neuroscientists, and how does it change across academic career stages? So to develop effective initiatives, we need demographic data to help pinpoint where and when and how to direct our efforts. Unfortunately, a comprehensive report on European neuroscientists does not currently exist, but we were able to gain some insight using anonymized membership data from FENS, the Federation of European Neuroscience Societies, represented here by the orange line. Among PhD students, over 60% of FENS members are women, which reflects what is seen in other parts of the world, such as the US, where the majority of neuroscience graduate students are women. This percentage drastically decreases at the postdoctoral stage to drop even further among principal investigators. And a similar leaky pipeline is observed among European academics across the humanities and STEM fields. And this is shown here by the red line. And this is based on data from She Figures, a report that's published every 3 years on the state of gender equality in research in Europe. And from this much broader data set, you can see how the proportion of women drops even further among senior faculty, so those holding full professorships. Now, if we look at the proportion of women in full professorships by country, and specifically in the natural sciences, which of course includes neuroscience, it's below 30% for most European countries. And we found that this correlates with a country's respective glass ceiling index, or GCI, which is a ratio that compares the proportion of women at all stages in academia to the proportion of women holding top positions like full professorships. So a GCI greater than 1 indicates that women are underrepresented among full professors. And this is indeed the case for all but one country of the European Union, and that was analyzed here. And so the higher the GCI, the stronger the glass ceiling effect, and the more difficult it is for women to move up the academic career ladder. And so taken together, it's clear that women in Europe are lost at each transition up the career ladder. But we were especially keen to understand why this might be happening at the transition between postdoc and principal investigator, namely junior professor, and then also during promotion to more senior or tenured faculty positions. And so we focused on 2 structural barriers that likely underlie unequal career progression: academia's attitude toward women's care responsibilities as they're driven by sociocultural norms, and then also gender-based discrimination. In Europe, postdocs in the life sciences are typically 30 to 40 years old. So this high pressure make or break career stage often coincides with starting a family for those who want to. And beyond the demands of pregnancy and birth, women are often tasked with the lion's share of care and domestic work. So women in Europe do an average of 2 hours more unpaid work per day than men. And so the pressure to prioritize work at this career stage can lead to the perception, especially for women, that a career in science is incompatible with family life. And indeed, perceived work-life balance and perceived support for family responsibilities are factors that influence the decisions of female postdocs, but not male postdocs, to leave academic science. And the demands of caregiving negatively affect pre-tenure women's, but not men's, intention to stay in academia. And so in terms of gender-based discrimination, a woman's family or relationship status may be inappropriately considered during hiring and promotion and used as a reason for a negative decision. And even for single women who don't currently have or ever plan to have children, the perception of their actual performance is too confounded by gender stereotypes or schemas of competence and commitment. And so women in high status positions like professorships are often perceived as being extreme and masculine traits, such as aggressiveness or aggression and hostility. And so they often experience resistance and backlash for this counter-stereotypic behavior. And this so-called social dominance penalty is thought to contribute to the low promotion rates of women in male-dominated fields. Most research on dominance penalties has focused on white women, but recent studies have taken a more intersectional approach to show how race, age, or gender identity interact to shape the stereotypic expectations of female professors. And so if you'd like to read more about this topic and learn more about country-specific and Europe-wide initiatives to address gender-based inequities in academic career progression, I invite you to check out our article. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. As you can see, Dr. Burke has really focused on one of those aspects that I mentioned earlier: career progression, transition point, and even position of leadership. So this is a wonderful, entree to the topic that we're discussing. Next, Sadaf, are you able to share your slides? Okay, now we're going to go to Dr. Sadaf Ahmed, and she probably will talk more about the cultural and religious impact and social aspect that are involved with gender gap in Pakistan. Sadaf?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for just highlighting the right points, and especially Dr. Ashley. She actually discussed about the core areas where we were focusing. With respect to Pakistan, there are so many other grassroots problems that are much more rooted in the religious and socio-cultural aspects, where we are unable to find out that where we are standing with representation of the women in Pakistan and how we are actually showing up to the global point of view as well. Because as we now conducted so many researches, so less than 10% of the women are there in the science and technology and engineering and STEM, you can say. But there are certain gender stereotypes, as Dr. Ashley discussed earlier. But you can imagine that we are the country where only 13% of the girls are going to school. So we don't have the primary education system. One is the lack of education, of course, the education facilities, the resources, and the poor, you can say, the government structure, because we are on the political roller coaster ride since the day we came into existence in 1947. So we are a very young nation with respect to that we haven't developed our old core system and the government system. But yes, there are certain religious and cultural aspects. People pay more attention to the education of the boys in the family. They expect more boys to be born. There are certain religious conditioning that is not only condition men of the family and then the society, but it's also the conditioning of the women mind. So mothers are also very convinced that the girls should stay at home, so they are not going to schools. One of the greatest example, if you all can have, is Malala Yousafzai, who actually won the Nobel Peace Prize from Pakistan. She was one of the girls were from the northern areas, and actually been confronted because of the religious aspect and the Talibanization we had back then. And now we are again facing that as the US moved from the Afghanistan. So we have so many other religious pressures now building again, and we are again at the verge of breaking down with so many challenges. So this is one of the aspects. Then when we come to the metropole, because 70% of the Pakistan is the rural area. So we are much more into the rural life, and we from the metropolitan city, we actually go and do the community service and everything. Even in the neuroscience advocacy with WWN, with IBRO, I am actually connecting all the dots from the rural Pakistan, where we have certain people who are actually interested in bringing the mental health and the brain health issues. They want to do research. They want to do, even BBC made the documentary on the suicide or main suicide aspect of in the female in the northern areas. But in the metropolitan city, in the higher level of education, we have certain other challenges. For example, one figure to quote is 85,000 of the women doctors are actually there who are not pursuing their career after getting medical degree. And this is almost 4 to 5 lakh Pakistani rupees invested on them annually by the government. And when they are actually completing the medical degree, they are not pursuing their career. We have a term here, Urdu. In Urdu, we say daughter-in-law, the bahu. So we have a term, Dr. Bahu, for the females, because they are not pursuing their career, but no one is asking them. So Pakistan Medical Association recently had a survey, and they called, or they made the directory of these female doctors, and they called them and they asked them that if they want to serve the country, because they have been invested. So mostly doctors declined because they had that burnout, they had this religious pressure, they had that stereotypic roles to play, and no one actually try to help them in their gender discriminated roles as well. So they are not coming from the house, they are not ready to actually serve in the online healthcare system and everything. So and then in the clinical field as well, we have very male dominant field in cardiology, in neurology, in neurosurgery. and we have a very male dominant field. If I'm saying male dominant field, so when Ashley was showing the graphs, it was like 30% of the female representation, but we have, it's like 98 to 2%. 98 to 2%. And those female neurosurgeons even left their careers because it was not easy to actually bear that pressure, go to that professional life where it is already dominated by the male. Then there are so many other things that I have listed it down. We have a certain gender roles and expectations there in Pakistan, and we have our cultural mindset. Limited access to education is one of the core issue. I'm saying because primary and secondary education is very poor in Pakistan, and in some areas we don't have schools at all. So societal norms and stereotypes are there. Religious convertism is also there. Our minorities, the Hindu religion, the Christian religion, we have the minorities, and we have certain, so many unjustified convertism is also there, and pressures are there. Our minorities are not very safe, and we are also not safe if we are of the liberal mindset and we are talking about these, so we are not actually feeling safe. So safety is one of the more major concern of female to work. And from, if you are minority, if you are women, you are minority actually. And then if you are from the other religion, so it is much more. And if you have these mindset, and if you are not going with the extremism, so it is because back in 20 years back when I started my career at university, so we were much more different nation. And in 20 years where the Talibanization and extremism is much more, now I actually teach to the class with 90% of the females are actually covered. They are not showing themselves, and it's like they are coming out of house with so many pressures, and the goals are very different now. And we actually traveled back in time as a nation. Arranged marriages and early parenthood, children having children, babies having babies, if you can say that, because 14 years and 15 years is the child marriages ages. And then we have so many women health issues because of the early marriages. Harassment and safety concern is much more. Lack of female role models because we are not showing up, so we don't have any role models to actually follow. Recently in science and technology, we have appointed a task force, science task force in the country. But the point is that all the task force is actually of the male role models and male scientists of the country. There was not a single female scientist put on that particular map. Economic constraints are there as well, and we are going very down. As you know that Pakistan is now not in a very stable condition. We don't have government since last 6 months. So we are on the economic melt as well. And lack of supportive policies. We don't talk about policies. In women empowerment, we actually host one women empowerment conference annually, and we have been brutally you can say mocked, and then being challenged for hosting those conferences. We cannot talk about in those conferences as well. The whole thing is now changing a bit in the metropolitan cities. If you can see these 3 pictures, these are the true depiction. 2 of these are from the Aurat March. Aurat is the word we use for female in Urdu, and this Aurat March is actually we host in on 8th of March. Women Day, International Women Day. Now females are coming out from every background to ask for their rights and to make the difference. And the last picture is from the graduation ceremony convocation of University of Karachi. That is my university. You can see the female representation in the among the students from the management sides, from the medical side. It is like 70% of the students are now female in the all basic sciences, in the medical sciences, but they are not pursuing their career again. So Pakistan is still ranked second to the last in the global gender index. And we are actually looking forward to more disruptions like these. so that we can actually do something. I am just closing my session with just one example. Back in September, I was traveling for IBRO conference to Spain, and to my way to Spain, I met a lot of female students from Pakistan and from Iran and from other countries, and they were actually going or traveling for pursuing their PhDs and postdocs, and all of them wanted not to come back to their countries. So, and the only single reason was these religious and social pressures and the things that are actually holding them back in actually representing themselves as a human. The neuroscience and the science things are far more better than these, but still we are not being represented as human in a single room where I actually represent as a neuroscience president of the Neuroscience Society of Pakistan. People don't like dominant women like us to just throw their idea or just put their voice on the table. So we are much more in certain basic problems and challenges rather than doing some great work to the neuroscience. Sorry for being so negative, but it is much more like rooted in our culture. So this is what I wanted to represent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sadaf, for sharing. And, you know, in Sadaf's presentation, we've heard topics of the influence of social, cultural, religious impact on gender gap, as well as some aspect of intersectionality with, you know, gender superimposed with religious, you know, affiliation. So now we're going to move to Dr. Angelina Kakusa Mizigi from Uganda. Angelina is a neurologist, and she is going to give us the perspective more broadly about what's going on in Uganda and perhaps more globally Africa. Angelina? Okay.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to share our experience from an African setting at this ALBA-IBRO webinar, Unfinished Business and Persistent Global Gender Disparities in Neuroscience. In the 2000s, I organized, courtesy of IBRO and World Women in Neuroscience, a workshop on promoting the field of neuroscience among women in Uganda. This is the picture of the participants at that conference, at that workshop, and the objectives were to highlight the problems faced by women joining the neuroscience field in Uganda, offer culturally relevant solutions to the identified barriers that thwart women's efforts to join the neuroscience field, and also develop networks for mentoring young women wishing to enter the field of neuroscience. For this presentation, I'll give you a snapshot of the problems that were faced by women. Just to begin, this is just information extracted from the IUCEA 2009 yearbook on gender equality in student enrollment in East Africa. You can see the universities in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Rwanda. When we look at total number of students and the female proportion, you can see that only in Uganda is it slightly above 50% female proportion students. And when it comes to the proportion of females in science and technology, less than 30% are in this field. So what are the barriers affecting African women joining the neuroscience field with the Ugandan experience? Amongst the issues were society attitudes and perceptions about the neuroscience field. Society perceives neuroscience as a difficult subject that is assigned to the males, and the males' attitudes towards enterprising, science-inclined women are viewed as cold and feminine, freaks of nature, so women opt to pursue the so-called more sexy, feminine art subjects. And society makes them feel guilty for having sacrificed the opportunity for having a family, undergoing lengthy training, and becoming established scientists. Culturally, women are advised not to advance their career before marriage. Then there are issues regarding maintaining a work-study family balance. For the female postgraduate student, for example, in training, you're advised not to become pregnant, otherwise it will ruin your chances of completing the course. This has changed over the course of time. Now you find many female postgraduate students getting pregnant as they are in training. But in those days, our days, it was like taboo. There is no maternity leave for these students, neither is there a room with a fridge to express the breast milk for feeding their babies or a crèche close to the workplace to take care of their children while they study. For the working mothers, job security is a critical issue, especially when you're not paid for the time that you're away from work due to pregnancy. So the dilemma that an African woman would face is you're caught up with a choice whether to become a career neuroscientist or a housewife, because you have to balance the career and the social roles. This has led to some women giving up their career to take care of their homes and families. Other challenges that were voiced in this workshop was lack of training courses in neurosciences. For example, at the moment, I took all my neurology training from abroad. There is no neuroscience training in Uganda, and it's quite expensive and not equally distributed nationwide. This implies that unless a woman gets an additional job or very supportive husband, it's difficult to maintain or sustain these training expenses. Then there's the issue of holistic female mentors or role models to emulate. They ask you, so who's the neuroscientist that I can look up to that has actually succeeded? So with lack of local female neuroscientist success stories, the ladies are less encouraged to join the neuroscience. Then there's also general lack of awareness of the neurosciences in general. No career guidance in schools for females to pursue this career path. You find that neurosciences are met probably later on in university, after the master's or at the university degree. There is really not much ingraining of neurosciences in the lower classes. So thank you for your attention, and I'll stop here and leave the rest for the discussion.
Thank you, Angelina. In Dr. Kakusa's remarks, she talked about some women in Africa actually leaving the profession. And that's an opportunity for me to mention that as we were planning this webinar, we actually started talking as to whether the term leaky pipeline was still relevant. And so this idea of, people not feeling supported, not having the proper resources, forcing them out of, the profession still remains quite, evident, especially in some countries. So thank you for bringing that perspective. The next speaker is going to be Dr. Fran Bobani. So Fran, you have the podium.
Okay, so let me just share my screen. Can you see my presentation? Yes. Okay, so
Yes.
thank you very much for inviting me. I must say that I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm a material scientist. And Dr. Ben Bars has always been a very strong, very important role model for me, because I'm a transgender woman in science, and I'm really honored to be able to speak here. That being said, I'll tell you a story about what happens in Argentina, and specifically what happens at the Argentine Research Council, which is called CONICET, because this is a very interesting example. Some years ago, about a decade ago, there were more men than women. And here I'm talking about permanent researchers, or researchers with a permanent position. And so you can see the data from 2007. And then you have women, you have men, and you have a total of about 47% women. And I'll make a parenthesis here because in my original presentation, I did not use the word women, and there was a reason for that. In Argentina, there's an open discussion whether or not we should say that we are women or mujer in Spanish because of the meaning, the traditional meaning associated to the word women in patriarchy. So this is an open discussion. I'd say it's a very heated discussion in Argentina in feminism, but that was, it's not considered an inclusive word nowadays in Argentina. No? So we try to talk about feminine identities, gender identities, or male or masculine gender identities. But that being said, let's go back to our story. There were more men than women. And as time passes, we can see that there were more women with permanent positions. And in 2022, we had a total of 54% women. And we can see that there was other, which would be other gender identities. And there were no one in 2007. And there was one person who identified as having a different gender identity. And that person is me, yours truly, in 2022, even though I identify myself as a transsexual woman, and legally I am a woman in Argentina, I thought it was very important to make it visible that we're not just men and women, and we're not only limited to this binary cisgender norm. We're taking the discussion beyond that in Argentina and in Argentine science. So that's why I answered and I registered as having a different gender identity. So what's the problem with those numbers? Some of our colleagues started to say that there was no gender gap in science in Argentina because, well, actually there are more women than men with permanent research positions. And this became a problem because some people were very loud and speaking at international conferences about this. And so we started to dig deeper. And what we saw is that when you look at career progression, or when you start looking at different levels, we see that women are actually stuck on lower levels. So we can talk about our glass ceiling, and we can actually quantify our glass ceiling. And here you have the different levels, the entry level, which is asistente in Spanish. It's the first row. You have about 61% women. This is overall. So we're considering all areas. And as you progress in our research career, with each step, there are fewer and fewer women, and I'm talking about percentage. So we're less and less represented in higher levels. And when we reach the most senior level, which is shown in red as the top level, there are only 26% women, even though we make up the majority. So it is very clear that something happens and we're stuck. We're not able to progress and advance our careers. And the top research positions, and that means leadership positions where people make decisions that affect us and affect our country as a whole, they are dominated by cisgender men. And this is a huge problem, a huge problem. Now, when we look at data, more specific data, this is what happens in biological sciences and health, and of course, neuroscience is included here. The situation is actually worse because there are more women or more people who identify as women or female gender identities. However, the progression is actually worse. So the slope of the curve, if we want to talk about it in these terms, is actually worse. And we see a different phenomenon at the second level, which is shown in red as adjuntos in Spanish, which would be something like an adjunct researcher. There are an overwhelming majority of women. So we see almost 71% of women stuck at the second level. So we're able to progress somewhat. We're able to leave the entry level and reach the second level, but then we get stuck. Women get stuck, and there's this overwhelming majority of women at the second level. And when we look at the most senior level, the top level, which is also in red at the bottom, we see that women are only 25% of most senior researchers. So when we look at this data, we see that we have a huge problem in career progression. It has to do with evaluation system. It has to do with having or not having, or being able or not being able to have a family. And also, I'd like to finish with a message that we are taking this discussion beyond binary cisgender norms. In Argentina, we already have 3 possible gender identities in our documents, which would be male, female, and no gender declared, which would be the famous X. And this data is obsolete because we're using this binary male female classification in a country where the discussion is way beyond that. And this is where we're headed. It's very difficult to have data that reflects our social reality nowadays, but this is where we're headed. And my message is we should be careful not to get stuck in this traditional man, women, binary, cisgender classification. Thank you.
Thank you, friend. That was wonderful. So now I think we have reached the portion of this webinar where we're going to have a set of questions posed to the panelists. While I try to get my screen, hold on. Let's see. Can you see that screen? I'm trying to put it onto presenter mode.
We can see the presenter mode.
So let me just ask the first question while I figure this out. So we've heard all those very compelling presentation from our panelists. So I have this question, the first question I'll ask to Dr. Ahmed. In the face of such challenging situations, how do you find inspiration to get you going? Because, you know, you mentioned that you're now the president-elect of the Pakistan Society for Neuroscience. You're involved in so many activities. So Sadaf, tell us, where do you get your inspiration, your motivation to keep going?
Some motivations to list is one of those women who actually get benefited from the science, not directly, but from the advocacy, from the practices we are making. For example, not to mention, but there are so many free mental health clinics we are running in the women facilities all over Karachi, Pakistan. So women are actually coming there, they are overcoming their mental health challenges, their health challenges, they are getting motivation to educating their daughters, they are actually making change in their families. So this is one of the motivation, and it actually pumps you up when you do the volunteer work and the community service. The second main motivation is few core women scientists that actually beside all these challenges come up with the ideas, come up for being the meritorious professors in this male dominant fields of the science and technology. And not to mention few is Professor Dr. Shahana Uruj Kazmi. She is a microbiologist, very well-known expert of communicable diseases. She is ambassador of American Society of Microbiology as well. She brought a lot of honor to Pakistan. Then we have Professor Dr. Darakhshan Halim. She is one of the known biochemist, neuropharmacologist basically, and she has a neuropharmacology lab, and she has a very good publication record in Nature and everywhere, and she's also one of the meritorious professor. She still has that lab close to the animal house, and she is still sit there and teach the undergraduate students, and she has lots of female young neuroscientists who are actually coming out of her lab motivated, and they are going everywhere in the world. In fact, in IBRO conference, I met 1 or 2 neuroscientists from Pakistan who actually are doing PhD abroad, but they are from the Dr. Darakhshan Halim lab. So we have so many motivations here as well.
Well, this is great. So this idea of role models that Dr. Kakusa mentioned is actually, evident for you in Pakistan.
Yes.
I have another question, and that's going to be posed to Dr. Bourne, Ashley. Given your experiences and what you have learned about barriers to full participation, what actions might you undertake that would make a difference? Of course, you've just published this wonderful paper, so that's one, step forward. But what other action might you undertake that would make a difference?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So, I mean, I think if I was perhaps in a more established leadership role, if I was perhaps a department chair at an institute or university, I would do things maybe that would have longer lasting changes to the institutional culture. So, one thing that we mentioned a little bit in the article, but I've become really quite conscientious about is academic housekeeping, and also just how a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work done by primarily women and underrepresented minorities, how that isn't recognized, and in some cases even discouraged. And so there could be, I think one could imagine ways to really be able to consider researchers' contributions to the institutional environment and society at large, and to include not only their research excellence, but also teaching and committee work and DEI work as well.
Thank you, Ashley. I think when we were planning this webinar, we actually touched on the concept of imposter syndrome. And in listening to the presentation that all of you have shared, even though we as a group realize that perhaps the whole term of imposter syndrome might have a negative connotation and actually brings it to the individual, I just wanted to kind of get a sense from Angelina and Fran as to whether the condition that you've described, encourage that kind of self-doubt. So what do you think about that? Is there such feelings from what you encountered both in Uganda and also in South America?
I think there's a lot of denial. We usually talk about skepticism, but even when we show data, there are people who say that no, this is wrong. This is not like that. Even when they're faced with the numbers, so they're in plain denial. And I'm talking about PhDs. I'm talking about people who have a very strong academic background, and people who should be able to interpret this kind of data. So I think nowadays we should involve psychology and psychologists to help us push for equality, because how do we reason with irrational people? I mean, you just can't reason with people who are in denial. And I think that's the biggest obstacle that we're facing nowadays. The data is available. It's there, and we're always showing numbers and graphs and everything, and still some people in positions of power, some decision makers, are in denial, and they're not doing anything about it.
Actually, Virginia, you had your hand raised, but I was going to go to you actually and ask you to address some of this as well, considering your expertise in the area. So what do you think of, what would be the next step to help us kind of get over those hurdles?
So first, I want to agree with Fran that there is a strong denialism streak, and also that psychology can be helpful. When I talk to groups of leaders at institutions, one thing I try to do is situate the data within the larger category of the kinds of errors of reasoning that people make, so that initially I present it as not gender related or diversity related, but cases where we know independent of that people are making errors in reasoning. And then I try to bring it, so that makes it a little more palatable. And then I try to bring it to diversity and excellence. So I think that people feel personally blamed, and with some good reason, because they have contributed to making a bad situation. But what psychology suggests is that guilt is not a good motivator for people, and that giving them a way forward in which they can take some steps that would be productive is a slightly better way forward. I also wanted to follow up on Ashley's comments, because there are people now who are creating dashboards within departments, looking at what kinds of contributions are people making, and deciding together how they should value those contributions. I think it's going to vary a lot depending on the type of institution. So very heavy research institutions are never, ever, ever going to rate teaching as highly as they rate research, because that's not the kind of institution it is. But they might rate it and other contributions more highly than they currently do. I think another issue is that white men especially think the system is fair because they succeeded in it. So they want to think that they deserve their current position and that the system is a fair system. So it takes a fair amount of discussion to indicate where the system might not be universally fair and how it should be changed to make it fairer across the board.
So I think that brings up the issue of getting a group of allies that actually can work with women neuroscientists to bring forth the problem and with data. And what Virginia is saying is that really to demonstrate that the system really inherently has some unfairness attached to it. And without having those allies, we might be, in a way, banging our head against the wall because we are, we're talking to the wrong people. We know where the problem is, but we are trying to really enlarge, the audience so that change can happen. So I have another question for the group. So as we're talking about this, as we're talking about partnering and getting allies, who might you partner with to improve the experiences of women and people of color in neuroscience? So I don't know, Angelina, do you want to take a stab at this?
Thank you, Emmeline, for the question. As you know, it all depends on the situation and the context in which you are. Speaking of the context in Africa, who can I partner with? Who can understand and be on the same wavelength that I'm with? It really takes time to change the cultural perspective and the way people view women. You find that you have to work extra hard to be recognized, to be seen that actually you're doing something. And when it comes, for example, to positions of leadership, to positions of probably heading a certain, chairing a department, when it comes to women, it's really a challenge. So which allies can you get? It depends on the particular circumstances. You have to actually sieve and detect. In one context, it may be certain people. In another context, it may be different. So you can't take a generalized view and say one thing fits all. It depends on whom you see, whom you can talk with one-on-one first to see, are we on the same wavelength? And then invite those people in to have a rapport with you. You can't go out there in public and talk because different views are really really rampant in society, and you can't really tell whether people are on the same wavelength with you. So I think a one-on-one first to get to know who understands what the situation is, understands this data, believes in it, believes in you, and then from there you can go on. But of course, changing policy takes time, but you start with small steps and you get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelina. Those are very good, suggestions for all of us to follow. I wonder, Mathilde, are there questions in the Q&A from the audience, or can we continue with the panel?
Yes, I would go to the audience. There's quite a few questions about parenthood.
Okay, do you want to read a question? I can't access it. Let's say Q&A. Okay, I got it. Okay, thank you so much.
So there's two questions about parenthood. One was addressed to the data of Ashley, but I think it can be asked as a broader question. And then another one, which is addressed to Fran, but can also be addressed to the group.
So let me just ask that question. This is specifically for you, Fran, and the question is it that the women are really stuck in lower layers of the hierarchy, or just that change takes time and that in a few years, those who just reach the lower layer will reach the top and the balance will be better? So this is a very optimistic view, but that's the question that's being posed. Do you think that those women, that the graph that you showed where there was that 70% that was stuck in that second level, will they eventually get there? That's the question.
Eventually it can be 300 years, as that was the latest United Nations estimate. Some people talk about more than 100 years. So I can confidently say that we will not be here to see it because we will already be dead. And maybe our children will already be dead by the time this change happens. So that's not something we can afford to do. We cannot afford to wait. Yes, there are some advances because we're actively working. We're building public policies. We're pushing for change. This is not an issue that solves itself. We must actively work and push for change because time is not on our side. That's what I want to say. We cannot afford to wait because our careers are at stake, our lives are at stake, and the future of future generations of scientists and researchers, their careers will in part depend on what we do, on what we choose to do, and what we choose not to do. And choosing to wait is something that will have a huge, terrible impact on future generations. So no, I don't think that's a good policy at all.
Thank you, Fran. There's a question for Ashley. Do you think that women might be denied promotion because they lag behind in the kind of high impact publication that depend on team science or collaboration or / networks that male colleagues are able to cultivate, but women miss out on those due to family role, motherhood, family duties?
So yes, I do think so. But in addition to, the undue burden of care work, it's also that, publications, essentially most aspects of the academic career. So publications, even collaborations, there's also biases that surround that. So are women getting, the same opportunities to, participate in collaborations in the first place, or, to be able to publish in these higher impact journals? But that aside, and that there's actually a really wonderful article about this specific to neuroscience. It's Lorenz et al., Lorens. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. In terms of, family roles and motherhood, absolutely. So in Germany and Austria, so I'm in Germany, there has been sort of a encouragement of mothers to be the caretakers. So there's these tax benefit systems in place that sort of de-incentivize secondary earners to continue to work. And so, historically, in certain regions of the world, there's these long and low paid maternity leaves. And you think, oh, wow, that's progressive. They're really long. But actually, from like a career standpoint, it's not so great. And so actually, I know I keep saying this, but I encourage you also to check out the article, because we do have a figure where we also show across European countries the percentage of children under the age of 3 that are only being taken care for by parents, namely mothers. So and you can see that when you consider the perceived childcare accessibility, that the countries that have a high percentage of women staying at home to take care of the children, instead of giving it to handing over the child for the day to state-run programs or things like this. There does seem to connect to the what we call the employment impact, which you can read about a little bit in the article. But yes, I'm hopeful that I answered your question.
So it seems, we've touched on this issue of how difficult it is to change policy. Perhaps we're talking more broadly in terms of policy at the national level or the federal level. But are there opportunities to actually start targeting the institutions, the academic institutions, or the neuroscience organization, maybe start at a lower level? And that's a question that I'm asking all of you. Are we raising the bar so high by thinking that we're going to change the national policy that we are actually missing an opportunity to start taking a little bit of giving a nudge to some of the institutions where we worked at? So what has been the response to some of those issues in your current institutions, for example? And anybody can answer that one. You've been pretty, I'm sorry, Angelina, go ahead. What's going on at your university?
Well, at my university, the issue of neuroscience, for example, is more in the faculty of veterinary medicine, where they'll look at there's some aspects of neuroscience in different faculties. It's not like it's in medicine or in a particular area. Maybe like in the faculty of medicine or in the faculty of biological sciences. What I suggest, or what I think, is that probably we are raising the bar too high. We need to start right from our families. What is it that we can interest our children right from the youth age about what neuroscience is in simple ways, so that they can learn about this. Then at school, are we having any role models going out to school to talk to the youth about what neuroscience is? Rather than waiting around the time of university, it seems rather vague, it seems rather disconnected. So I think starting from our families, in our environments, and then trying to see how we can then build it up into the institution. The demand actually comes from lower down, rather than us waiting for it at a higher level.
Thank you, Angelina. There's a very nice question in the chat about, hold on for a second. We are being asked to potentially comment on a recent paper in Science Advances that demonstrate that toxic workplaces are the main reason women are leaving academia. Does anybody know about this paper, and would they be able to comment what would be the best strategies to improve that situation? So toxic work environment, hostile work environment, people not being safe. Anybody wants to tackle this one? Virginia, are you aware of that paper? You're muted.
Yes, I put the reference in the chat. to the paper that I think the questioner is referring to. So I think, as with most things, it's a bit of a mistake to say that there's a single reason. We have many reasons that converge on not properly crediting and retaining women and researchers of color. And a toxic workplace is certainly one of them. I also put in the chat a paper that I think is very important by Ross and colleagues from 2022, that women are credited less in science than men. This is a particularly important paper because it looks at grant progress reports. This will be particularly interesting to you, Emmeline, if you don't already know about it. So every year you have to write a progress report, and you indicate who worked on the grant, what their role was, and the percentage of their time spent. What this paper by Ross and colleagues shows is that women are undercredited in papers emanating from those grants. So they can equalize the contributions of men and women per the progress reports, and demonstrate that women are doing work equivalent to the work that men are doing, as written in the progress reports, but they are not becoming authors. And the more important the paper, the less likely it is that a woman will be credited. So yes, we have to change the atmosphere, but we also have to change who gets credit for the work that they do.
Yeah, thank you, Virginia. So I don't want this webinar to end with only talking about some of the problems. I want to mention that the ALBA network is going to continue the series of webinars, and there will be a second webinar in 2024 that's going to be focusing on solutions. But I'll just give an example of a potential of an experiment that's currently ongoing at the National Institute of Health. In response to the lack of participation of underrepresented minorities in science, NIH actually started a new program called the FIRST program, where instead of hiring single individual, let's say in a department, they actually are awarded a grant to hire cohorts, so that you have a community that's actually growing together in the department, trying to diminish this sense of isolation and potentially toxic environment that people are talking about. So we are beginning to come up with potential approaches to address this issue. This is an experiment. This is just ongoing for I think two years or so. So we don't know how this is all going to pan out, but those are the kind of solutions that we need to start thinking about. And I see Fran has her hand up. Fran?
Yes, I'd like to make some comments about that. I think that it's really important to speak up, because I see many women who are afraid losing their jobs, so they tolerate toxic environments, and sometimes they even get sick because of it, because they're afraid of losing their jobs. And I would say that silence is not on our side. Time is not on our side, and silence is also not on our side. And as Audre Lorde put it, our silence does not protect us. So if more women speak up, and if we start connecting and talking about our toxic workplaces and our toxic environment and our toxic bosses and research group leaders and et cetera, I think we just might push for change, and it might be effective, and we might have some results that go beyond pink washing, because talking about gender and inclusion is good for marketing, and so institutions do it a lot, but very few institutions go beyond pink washing, and I think we should speak up.
So thank you so much. Actually, let me just, if you have not, seen this yet, World Women in Neuroscience just released their last newsletter yesterday, and the title was Finding Your Voice. So I think, this is very appropriate, that, that's what we want to encourage. We want to encourage people to, identify the problem and actually have the courage to speak up, as Fran is saying. So we are at time. I think we had a very good discussion. I want to thank my co-chair. I want to thank the panelists for their wonderful presentation, and obviously the ALBA Network and IBRO for sponsoring such a wonderful series of webinars in that topic. So thank you, everyone.
And I would just want to encourage all of you to go to the survey. You will receive it tomorrow by email, but you can already now scan the QR code. Please let us know what you thought of this webinar so we can improve our future webinars. And you're also very welcome to join us tomorrow and Friday for the last 2 webinars of the ALBA week. And also apologies to the people who asked questions in the Q&A that we couldn't get to. They were all very good. Thank you very much for your participation.
Is there any way that you could send the references that were put in the chat to the group, Mathilde?
Yes, we will follow up with an email to all of the registrants. Okay. With references to all the papers that were shared today.
Thank you so much. Okay, goodbye, everybody. Nice talking to you all and to work with you. Bye-bye.